How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of horseshoehuddle.com, and also your favorite co-host over the Locked On Colts podcast. I'm joined today by Ben Borus at Colts Film Room over on socials. You guys know him. You love him. We are your film nerds, and we haven't done this film nerds podcast setting here in a while here, Ben, but we had I had this plan for a whole series here on the offseason, as long as this guy doesn't get hired to be a head coach, where it's called Lou in Review. We dive into the aspects of Lou Anarumo, talk about some of the pluses, the minuses, and also debunking a couple of the misconceptions about him. And before I go into individual 10 to 15 to 20 minute film videos, as long as YouTube lets me do the film videos, I wanted to do an overarching intro video to all of Lou Anarumo, and who better to join me than you, Ben, where we just talk about kind of the things we saw on film, both good and bad, and also, again, start off some of that debunking of some weird misconceptions around Lou Anarumo. So this will be part one of the Lou in Review series here on the channel. But Ben, let's kick it off with some positives on Lou. We're going to talk about kind of some things that we liked that he brought to the table, some aspects that even if they didn't work, like you and I appreciate as film nerds. If you guys are here for the negative aspects, because I know there's a lot of Lou Anarumo haters in the fan base, just go to this minute mark here. This whatever this minute mark is I'm pointing at. Zach Hicks in post-production will put a minute mark there to help me out. But yeah, starting with some positives, Ben, what are some things that really stood out to you about Anarumo's style of defense, what he brought to the Colts on that side of the ball? And look, I mean, this was a team that across the board in 2024 was a very low-end defense by most metrics. Yep. They were 16th in EPA per play against this past year with all the injuries they dealt with. So while some of the perception late in the season was terrible defense, can't stop anybody, overall they finished around middle of the road, despite facing 17 starting quarterbacks this year. Most teams don't face 17 starting quarterbacks in a season. So middling results, but what are your kind of thoughts on some of the good things he did?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that Gus Bradley was there for 3 years, and it really felt like he was there for much longer, to be honest, towards the end of it. Just when you continuously watch this defense, it was a lot of the same stuff. And Gus did get creative towards the end on third down, no doubt about it. But for the most part, everyone around the league knew what this defense was going to do, and it was pretty bland. And I feel like Lou was the complete opposite, just in terms of he really, when he was hired here, his whole thing was, I'm going to build a game plan to stop the opposing offense. We are not going to just be a quarters defense. We're not going to be a, single high defense. We're not going to be not necessarily do it. We're going to do what's best to stop that opposing attack and develop unique game plans around that, put people in the best positions, the best matchups. It sounds so simple, but it's very easy also to look on the other side of it and be we're a really good quarters team, so we're just going to run quarters. And if you beat us with all the quarters beaters you got, that's great. We know what you're going to do. We know how it's going to play. And that's really how Gus Bradley lived with the cover three. Here, it was just in terms of where they were all over the map. They had really tried to be obviously a man coverage team, but they had really mixed a lot of things up. And I think obviously the unique pressure that they brought and some of the stuff that we really just did not see on a down in, down out basis, particularly on rundowns, I really did enjoy. I thought the Seattle game plan was really unique in terms of what they were able to do. And be able to shut down that offense in a way I know that they slumped a little bit there, but that was the Colts shut that Seattle defense out in a way that really hadn't been. And to be honest, I was really excited about this episode because there's so much you can talk about with Lou Anarumo. And I was telling you this before we hit record, is that there's so many confounding variables with the injuries. And he probably thought he was going to be dealing with 2 all-pro corners and a defensive tackle, and that never really came to fruition. And so it's hard to figure out where he kind of stands, where he deserves praise, where it's necessary, where he deserves blame, where it's necessary. So I think this will be really interesting discussion on just all of that.
Yeah, for sure. I really want to touch on the individual game plans, though, because I thought there were a handful of times throughout the year, just going off the top of my head, the Miami game plan to start the season with that constant, we're going to drop 8 coverage against Tua Tagovailoa and Mike McDaniel, where that offense is based on hitting landmarks, throwing the ball over the middle with anticipation because you know where receivers are going to be. And Lou Anarumo was like, I'm going to drop 8 into coverage as much as possible and get bodies in those throwing windows. You look at how they played against Seattle, where they were just run blitzing the hell out of that run game to get them off track, and then playing that a good mix of man and zone on the back end. I even think the Kansas City game plan overall
was good.
Was really good. It's just it fell apart in the fourth quarter because the Colts offense couldn't move the ball, where a lot of those third and fourth downs was that drop 8 coverage again. They're getting more bodies into the lanes. You know that Mahomes is going to scramble regardless of what the pressure looks like. You know he's going to run around back there. So they were running these contained rushes, just keeping him in the pocket and making him like force the ball into 8 guys in coverage, 9 guys in coverage. It was a very good game plan, and it held the Chiefs to a lot of field goals. So I thought we saw a lot of good individual game plans throughout the year. I thought that he changed things up. I think the Rams game plan was very good as well.
Yeah, that's another one.
Like Stafford had some MVP moments,
and there was like Xavier Howard in that as well.
Right,
season, which is important to acknowledge. I think the other thing that he's very good at is he'll show you one thing on a certain down. Like when you go like chart these stuff and you are looking at what they're playing on a down in game situation basis, he will show you on third and medium. He'll show you it for 3 quarters, and then it gets to the fourth quarter, or it gets to a moment in the game that he needs to do it, and he'll mix it up. And I thought he was really good at that. And I you can look at it, and you might not, if you want to look at it just in terms of success or fail, then yes, there were some times late in games that they did give up key situations. I would also tell you that some of that was not necessarily based, like the call might have been good, but people didn't win their individual matchups, and that's where you saw a lot of that late in the year. So from like when you're trying to like really parse through all of this and figure out where, I think there was a lot of good in what Lou did in a lot of things where you could go an entire fourth quarter, and Gus Bradley was very stubborn about how he wanted to do things. And like that led to some games where, you know, the Colts just got absolutely diced up. And I think that this time the Colts really felt like they were in control. There were some really nice zero pressures. I thought they brought really early in the year. I mean, they did late in the year, but really when they trusted their cover guys a little bit more. I thought I think the Atlanta game was a situation where they were able to really, like, when you think about like a huge win for someone is Sauce Gardner learning the playbook essentially in a week, traveling with Drake London. And obviously that it's not that they completely shut down that offense, because that offense was fairly decent at that point.
They ran the ball very well, and that game was the big
thing.
And
there was a couple run fits that were just really bad, which is, yes, it does fall on the coaching, but it's not necessarily schematics that is what got them beat all the time, which was really
yeah, for sure. A couple other things I had written down here. One was I liked the just usage of trap coverages throughout the year. There were a handful of simulated pressures that resulted in quarterbacks throwing the ball right to defenders. There was that Palms interception that Mekhi Blackman had. Really nice trap coverage against Geno Smith in the Raiders game. There was the near interception in Matthew Stafford where you're showing that mugged A-gap blitz with Zaire Franklin. You're bringing the safety down, so it looks like we're bringing 6-7 guys. Franklin bails out of that right over the middle of the field. Disguise. Yeah, great disguise. You just didn't have a playmaker there at linebacker to get the interception. But I think there were a lot of really cool trap coverages. And look, in today's NFL, you can suffocate offenses as long as you want, right? But you need turnovers to change the flow of the game. And I think what Anarumo did very well this year was putting those trap coverages in there, doing those sim pressures and bailing out and bailing unique guys. I mean, Laiatu had 3 interceptions this year, right? The one against
that's a coaching stat as much as it is a lot, like, good for Latu, no doubt about it. But that's a coaching stat. Like, there were some of these where, like, I'm thinking more the Miami game, he dropped right in the window. It was a terrible throw by Tua at the time. It's not like Latu was like covering a guy one-on-one 50 yards down the field like Von Miller did that one time in his time with the Broncos. So it's like, so that's part of it.
Yeah, you're getting him into those windows. So I think just that ability to disguise and trap quarterbacks and get them into interceptable passes was putting guys in these positions to make plays. Now, there were some times where guys just didn't make those plays, but they did put a lot of guys into situations to make those game-changing plays. The interceptions, again, at the end of the day, are just so vital in this league. Cameron Bynum was able to take advantage of most of them, but some other guys, I think, you have more like faster playmakers out there, and I think the Colts could have came away with even more interceptions. Going to the run defense, though, I think the Grizzly front was a good win this year, and credit to you. Yeah, credit to
Yeah,
you for giving me that term, grizzly front, because I was like, I messaged you like halfway through the year, like, what are you calling this front? Because it's not a bear front. It's like a nickel.
not true bear. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a nickel five-man front, right? Where they have three defensive tackles, two defensive ends. Sometimes it'll be like an underlook where they do one defensive end and then a Drain Pratt on the other end. But
yep.
it's a five-man front across the board with one linebacker behind, and sometimes they'll bring that strong safety down. And it's how they combated these 12 and 13 personnel looks. If you look at the Seattle game, for instance, they used it a good bit against Seattle because Seattle wanted to be in these 12, 13, 21 personnel looks sometimes too with the fullback in there.
And there are
So,
guys that like to get it to the perimeter, and that's part of the
right.
reason why you're trying to really cancel out gaps and then funnel the ball to the sideline. And I think they did
Mm-hmm.
that for the most part. I think we saw the Falcons game, I want to say, where Bijan broke one loose. Like
Yeah.
the one thing about those is like it can work if you execute it. There's times where you can really get gashed. We did see that. And I think that was a part of it. But the Grizzly front was a big win because that's not something. I think there were so many times where like they would come in a 4-2-5 even front with Gus Bradley and they would just run to the bubble every single time. And it's like, okay, well, like it's great when you have Grover Stewart who can like be a one gap guy and really just like shut it down, but it might not work that way. So
Yeah. No, I had so many reservations coming into the year with like the NFL changing into this, like, we're going to run 12 personnel and we're going to throw out of this type of league with Lou Anarumo coming in here with his like 95% like away from base, right? Like
yeah,
98% away from base, where he doesn't put three linebackers on the field. So how does he combat when teams put more tight ends on the field and they run those play action looks? Well, the way he combated it was a lot of these Grizzly fronts, and with the depth at defensive tackle and how these guys performed in that front in particular, like I think Adetomiwa Adebawore still has some lengths that he can go to and run defense. But when he was in those Grizzly fronts and he was just shooting one gap and getting upfield, that was when we saw the best of him in run defense. Neville Gallimore, I think that's when he's at his best as well, when he can
early
not
season
be the
Cross as well.
yeah, Nick
Early
Cross coming
season,
down. Right. You have, you can have Grover over top of the center and just have that one-on-one block with Grover. Or if they want to occupy him with two, then again, Adetomiwa can shoot a gap. Neville Gallimore can shoot a gap. I think it just put those guys in their best situations and allowed the defensive ends too, instead of two gapping, to play more that outside leverage and then force things back inside to, again, where Gallimore is, where Tommy is, where the linebacker is crashing down. So I think those Grizzly fronts were a great response to how offenses wanted to attack with 12 and 13 personnel. And in particular, we saw it well against the Rams. We saw it
yeah,
do well against the Seahawks, like you mentioned. The Atlanta game was tough, but Bijan Robinson is just a
yeah, he's
god.
doing that, Ted. He's doing that, Ted.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I think that's
it worked
part.
really well against like some good rushing offenses around the league.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that was one thing where like I thought that they were going to struggle early on in the year with that because
Me too.
that's usually what you see. You bring in a new OC and it's like they had fit the run basically one way for 3 years now. And like a lot of these guys were going to be playing completely different techniques and that doesn't always translate right away. And to their credit, it did. And maybe that's a defense. Maybe part of that is this is the defense they always should have been in. Maybe the other part of that is it's a really good coaching job. I think they know only they know. So I was overall really impressed with the run defense overall, though it was weird, which we'll get into, I'm sure. But like
Yeah.
when it was really working, it really was. I think the other part too is I think that they had done some really cool things on the back end in terms of disguise. I know we have talked about some of that. But those aren't necessarily easy things to do. Like, oh yeah, everyone does them. Not everyone always executes them well. I think we saw especially early in the year where they were really able to do that, especially when they, got Ward. But there was that stretch where they had Xavier Howard and things. It doesn't matter what they were rotating to. It was just like, hey, we're gonna pick on Xavier Howard, and that's why things ended the way it did. Once they made that change, that stretch in the year, obviously the schedule did get a little bit easier from there on out, which I think is important to acknowledge. But they did really do some cool things, I think, on the back end, especially versus Cam Ward in Tennessee. I think that was.
Yeah, right. That's a good call out there. I also want to say I think the communication across the board on this defense was a lot better this year
Yes.
than what it was
Yeah.
last year. It felt like last year with Gus Bradley, because that defense was so built on being bend don't break, and we'll talk more about bend don't break later on in the show. But because that defense was built so much on bend don't break, just get to your landmarks, stay there, come up and attack and tackle, that whenever you gave up a big play, it was like there was some weird miscommunication, right, in
Yeah.
Gus Bradley's defense, especially in the red zone, too. They had so many miscommunications in the red zone under Bradley where it was like, man, we just can't survive this way. While there were a few miscommunications this year for sure, and some guys getting weird depth and thinking guys were going to be otherwhere, which is expected in a first year of a new system, I think by and large communication was so much better this year. Now it
Yeah.
helps when you're playing a lot more man coverage. Like, what's your communication in man coverage? Like, stay on guy.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
it's a lot
exactly.
easier. But I think a lot of how they respond to play action in a lot of these games. I go back again to that Seattle game. Their play action responses in that game were great. Play action responses against the Rams were pretty good overall. I think that they, by and large, like, again, some guys got beat on play action, which we'll talk about in the next segment, but by and large, they responded very well to play action. I think they were better in the red zone this year with their communication and coverage back there. Some really timely interceptions and big plays made in the red zone. So I think the communication was a lot better this year. And I think that's a big credit to Chris Hewitt and Jerome Henderson and those coaches more on the back end, where it's like they were rotating 9, 10 corners out there for most of the year.
Yeah.
And I think the communication, again, by and large, was very good. So, again, it's not perfect. There's still some lengths you want to go with it, but I did like the way that, like, for the most part, guys were where they needed to be. It's just, were they going to make a play on the ball? That's more of the question. But guys were where they needed to be, and they knew where they needed to go. They just sometimes didn't make a play on the ball.
Yeah. The other thing that I think we should definitely point out as we're talking about positives is the way that Lou manufactured pressure, because he didn't have the defensive line that I think that, like, most guys had. Like, that's a key weakness. Part of the reason I was probably anti-Sauce Gardner trade, but like he found a really good way to manufacture rush. Sorry. I'm looking at it here. They had 8.8% six-man rush pressure percentage. So six-man pressures. That's second in the league behind the Vikings at 11%. So when you think about, like, how aggressive they were in terms of bringing six, they really were. They led the league in that category, and their EPA was negative 20 throughout that. So their total EPA when they did that. So they were really good when they did that. I think we saw some moments where it didn't work so well, but there was when you think about the defensive line that was at his disposal, like, we've talked a lot about it on other episodes. I know you have talked about it on your show at length. Like, Latu was a solid player for them, but that's about what they had in terms of guys that could truly get after the passer. A lot of guys that were on that team 2 years ago when they led the league franchise record in sacks. A lot of those guys have regressed since. They didn't get DeForest Buckner back the same way. They didn't get what they liked out of. They didn't get early returns on JT Tuimoloau. So being able to lead the league and have a pretty decent, pretty effective total EPA when we're bringing six is important. So
yeah, I thought the pressures were fun and interesting, and it was such a thing that he had to do, right? It was like necessary for survival throughout the Colts year for their defense. And I think that's why we saw so much man coverage too, is because what's the one thing you can do with man coverage compared to zone is with man, especially if you're in press man, you can delay releases, you can disrupt timing, and you can give that rush time to get home. Whereas if you play zone, there's always going to be like a player in the flat open or a guy underneath open and force your defense to tackle. So I like the fact that, there were a lot of times, even again with these 8th, 9th, 10th string corners out there, we did see Lou bring that pressure still, because he's like, you know what, Jonathan Edwards, I know that you can't make a play on the ball right now. Like, please just make one play on the ball going forward. I keep talking about this, but like, you can at least disrupt the guy at the line of scrimmage, and we can bring 5 or 6 and disrupt the quarterback that way. I respect that approach, I think, a lot more than we have a downgrade at corner, let's drop 7 guys at cover 2 and just play the sticks and have them come up and tackle. I do respect the aggressive approach there.
I think the other part too that's probably worth acknowledging is that his effectiveness bringing pressure did drop off halfway through the year. When they lost the guys in the coverage, like, you really saw it. Like, and this, I don't want to jump the gun to get to the negative portion, but like the early season returns in terms of him bringing pressure were really good. He was able to get guys home, and a lot of those guys were DBs, and that's why you looked at their sack numbers or their pressure numbers, and it wasn't like totally awful, but it's mainly because the guys on the defensive line weren't actually the ones. They were just opening up holes for second level defenders to make plays. So I think the early returns were certainly good. The later returns not so much, which I think is a part of the equation. So
yeah. And one thing I kind of want to end the positives with, though, is like overall, and we saw a lot of good praise from Mina Kimes. I saw at one point was praising this defense. Cody Alexander, who does fantastic work, obviously with match quarters, was praising this defense. In today's NFL, you can't be stagnant. You just
Yep.
can't. Like
You
you, no matter what your personnel is on defense, you can't stagnate. You can't run one coverage over and over unless you have the Texans defense. So unless you have like 6 of the top 20 defenders in football on defense, you can't be stagnant.
And
You have to.
they are, which is like pretty
Yeah.
they don't need to be anything else.
Right.
Which you're getting to. And it's like, I personally, after seeing the Gus Bradley thing play out, it's like, if you have the dudes for it, dude, fine, that's great.
Right.
But I would much rather you bring some of the exotic pressure and you get burned off it, and it's like, oh well, these quarterbacks are too good, than be on the side of like, I'm just gonna just play some quarters or whatever.
Right.
When you're not elite at coaching it, like I think the other part is like Vic Fangio is very good at coaching some of these things where like you don't see him necessarily bring pressure as much or historically as much, but he's really good at coaching things up and matching patterns to an elite level. I don't necessarily think that he's had the guys Lou has yet in Indianapolis in order to do that. So hopefully that's something.
Yeah, if they can get healthy after this year. But
exactly. That's the part.
That was the one final remark I wanted to make about like the positives with Lou, is like he was very, very, very diverse this whole season in terms of just his approach, how he approached certain downs, how he mixed and matches coverages from week to week, from game to game, from snap to snap, and how he approached even like, again, if I'm going to call a cover 2 on this play and a cover 2 on this next play, it could be completely different. Like the 4 guys rushing, the guys dropping. Yeah. So he was as diverse as you could possibly be this year. Did it lead to the best success this year? Maybe not. But I do think that that's kind of why we saw the ups and downs of this defense. Is I don't know if we would have saw as many ups if they were this like stagnant defense. I think the only reason we even got some of the ups is because they were so diverse in how they approached playing on that side of the ball. And it did lead to some really good performances, even in the second half of the year when they were not perfect. You know, I thought they had some good performances against Houston. I thought they had some good performances against like the second Jacksonville game. I thought was a pretty good defensive performance in terms of just taking the football away and getting Trevor Lawrence into mistakes. The Seattle game obviously is like the magnum opus of the of the whole year, even though it resulted in a loss. But yeah, I think the diversity that they brought on defense was a breath of fresh air. And it's what led to a defense that was up and down rather than defense that was just down, like it was kind of in the last 2 years with Gus Bradley.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's a big part of it. And like being so aggressive, I think did get some of those early returns. I love that point that you made, that like, I just don't think this defense, if they had just really rolled out the same scheme, but we're just going to upgrade the personnel, I don't think you would have got it. I think it covered up for some mismatches early on in the season where like, because they were aggressive, because they played some younger quarterbacks earlier in the season, they were able to, again, get guys to their second hitches. I think a big part of being a good defensive coordinator, if you're not going to get sacks or you're not going to get turnovers at that elite level, is like, can you get guys on their second hitch? And you see the Houston defense, I mean, they have guys in the backfield by the time you're on your first one. But like they'll get – that's another thing that, especially early in the year, kind of covered up for some of the clear mismatches, which we'll obviously get into.
Yeah. So getting to some negatives now. So again, this is where we're getting into the negative part where post-production Zach is telling us where to go. So 23 something minute mark. You know, I think diversity is good on defense, and I do not want to push too hard against it. There were at times though where it's like the need to be diverse led to some mismatches for the Colts defense. Most notably, how often we were dropping defensive linemen into coverage. Again, I love the thought process here. It's very Brian Flores, very Pat Narduzzi. Like, this is where they come from, where it's like, you can bring 4, but it can be a different 4 on every single snap to muddy the picture for quarterbacks. And I think it did lead to some good results. And most notably, like, Leatu Latu had good production in that. But Samson Ebukam, Kwity Paye, there were some defensive tackles dropping into coverage. I saw some Gallimore in coverage and like Grover in coverage at times too. Like very not as much as the defensive ends, but a lot of defensive ends dropping into coverage. And while like you're probably going to get the same pressure regardless because these defensive ends couldn't get pressure on the outside, like I don't know if Samson Ebukam covering that hook window is going to be a recipe for success in the NFL.
Yeah,
Like
I think
it's tough.
I think the dropping three, I think part of it is like when you scheme something up and it looks great and you get the pressure gets home. Oh, wow, that's great. Like,
Right,
okay,
right,
we're like, obviously when Lou is drawing this up in the meeting, he's not expecting Laiatu Latu to be out there and cover like Fred Warner. Like, there's no way.
right.
But when it doesn't happen, it looked very ugly. And then it's one of those things where you're sitting at home and you're like, that sucks. Yeah. So I think that was a part of it too. That was something big too. Like I saw it when I was looking at this Bengals defense before he even got there, you would see Trey Hendrickson, who was the sack leader at the time, dropping into coverage at a wild amount. And I'm like, this is one of the best pass rushers in the league. He can't be dropping into coverage. And I think that's a part of the staple of this defense where I don't care. You're just going to be a football player. You're not going to be a pass rusher. You're a football player. When it works, it obviously looks great. When it doesn't, it did not look so great as we, so.
Yeah. You almost need to get like a guy or two in here in the rotation, like a Baron Browning type. Like Baron Browning played some off ball in college, right? Or Dallas Turner, who can run a 4.4 and played some off ball earlier in his life. Like you have guys like that in your rotation, and say you're mugging the A gap with one of them, and you can bail one of those guys out. The offense wouldn't expect it, but he can at least be capable in doing that. Where, like, again, if you're going to do it with Kwity Paye like 8 times in a season, sure, you might get the quarterback. Like, the quarterback wouldn't expect it. If you're doing it like 20 to 30 times, at that point, we're just putting a guy who can't cover into coverage,
Exactly.
And it's just, yes, I like the diversity, but again, like, we can't sacrifice talent for diversity.
Can I make a point that's somewhat on point to this, but also off point to this when it comes to guys being in coverage who can't cover?
What the linebackers?
I was going to say the way so we went into last year and it was like wide receiver ones were shredding this defense. Justin Jefferson shred this defense. Roma Dunze shred this defense. Malik Neighbors shred this defense. Now this year, it wasn't receivers. It was tight ends. Tight ends shred this defense. Arande Gadsden went for 164. Trey McBride, I believe, was pushing 100. Kittle went for 122. Strange was a problem. Pitts, I believe they did hold in check. Am I wrong on that? I might not be. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong.
They did mostly hold him in check. They didn't throw the ball because Penix couldn't hit the broadside.
Yeah, exactly. And that was part of it.
Right.
The Steelers have like 5 tight ends, so they all had really good days. So that was like a big problem. I think if we had played the Dolphins later in the year and we were playing Darren Waller, he would have cooked this defense. So it's like,
well, and here's the thing, and maybe this can kind of be like an overall pro and negative Anarumo, because he's a part of this, right? He's part of the personnel.
No doubt.
They didn't have the what's the famous meme or whatever? Like, you don't have the facilities for that big man. Like, they didn't have the facilities to cover a tight end, because they tried with the linebackers, right? No go. They did not. They put Austin Ajike out there for some of because he's faster than the other 2 guys. No go. Couldn't do it.
No way. No chance. Yep.
Terrible, right? Then they started doing their bigger corners, right? Their sub package corners covering. So early in the year,
who actually had success with in Cincinnati.
Right. So early in the year, it was Jonathan Edwards, and actually he was pretty good in the role, like in that role in particular. But then Edwards had to start after that, so it didn't work. Then Jalen Jones had it later in the season to varying degrees of success when Jones was there. They put safeties over top of it. Nick Cross. Nick Cross in coverage this year was, not great.
I thought that, and that's why I thought this wouldn't be a problem, because of like Nick Cross to come in and do it, and it just didn't. It didn't come to fruition. It was a big problem in big moments. Obviously, we knew what Kittle did. We didn't play Brock Bowers. Had the Colts played Brock Bowers, that would have been a problem. Overall, just you look at what tight ends did to this defense, and it's obviously this kind of goes to my main negative besides tight ends shredding this defense. And I have to imagine Lou played some quasi GM to get guys that knew this system onto this defense. And outside of and correct me if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Outside of like the brief Mike Hilton performance where he played pretty solid, a lot of these guys, and I guess the Jermaine Pratt versus Kansas City.
Pratt was fine. Yeah.
Pratt was fine. a lot of the guys that I would imagine Lou had advocated did not come here and play really good football. And I think a part of it was why Chris Ballard had to get up at his end of year press conference and said, we need to get younger and faster, because there was a lot of old, slow guys out on that defense.
Yeah. Can I say it's very fascinating, because when it came to the younger guys, right, Lou wanted the fast guys on the field with the younger guys, right? So when it became the conversation of Jalen Jones versus Jonathan Edwards, he wanted Edwards on the field. He wanted Cameron Mitchell on the field. He wanted Mekhi Blackman on the field because they're faster, younger players, right, than Jalen Jones, who can be a good Gus Bradley corner, but he can struggle in man coverage because he doesn't have the foot speed. You look at some of the defensive linemen and stuff, like they wanted some of the faster, more athletic guys on the field. But the weird part is when it came to veterans, it didn't matter their foot speed if they knew the system. So it was like this weird dichotomy of like, if it came down to, if it's not his guys, he wants the faster guy on the field. But if it is his guys, it doesn't matter how fast you are. So I think part of this was like a really weird headbutting between Lou and Ballard, where it's like, if you can't get me young, fast guys, at least get me guys who know my system. And it led to this like really weird like personnel on that side of the ball this year, where there was this mix of guys who had played with Lou who were old and slow.
Xavier Howard.
Right, Xavier Howard. Or it was these guys who were just not ready for the moment, but were faster than the guys that Ballard had drafted and had hoped for, like the Jalen Jones, like Jalen Carlies, like JT Tuimoloau, like Kwity Paye. Like those guys were not good fits for the system and not good players for the system. So Lou just didn't care about them. But he kept going with these like undrafted guys who like were not ready. So it just became this mess of a personnel standpoint on that side.
And part of this is like, okay, when I think about Lou playing quasi GM, he obviously went with the expectation that he was probably going to have Justin Wally at his disposal. He was probably going to have Hunter Waller. He was probably going to have Sauce Gardner and Charvarius Ward, because those were freak injuries at the time. So like some of that is part of it. But I think when the Colts found themselves in a pinch, they made it worse. They didn't try and band it. They didn't do what a lot of teams have been able to do that are even playing in the playoffs still, of like putting a Band-Aid on some of these injuries. And instead they found these old slow guys to essentially come in there. And I think that's why you saw the result that you did with the 49ers game, where Kyle Shanahan, to his credit, and I think this goes to the overarching discussion, is we see offensive coaches scheme things up for mediocre players on offense all the time. With defense, it's much harder. You have to have dudes. You have to have dudes.
You can't hide it.
You can't hide. A lot of really good defensive coaches end up being labeled as really bad defensive coaches because they just didn't have the same dudes. And a lot of vice versa. Some mediocre defensive coaches get labeled as these geniuses because they have elite guys at their disposal. And that's part of it. Defense is something you can't teach a guy to go cover Puka Nacua. Like, it's just not happening. So I think that's also worth noting.
Yeah, no, I do think that was probably the biggest overall takeaway, was like, we need Lou and Ballard to be on the same mindset when it comes to the players on the roster. Like, I don't care if they have to sit in an office for 8 straight hours and go through, like, what do you think of this guy? What do you think of this guy? Will this guy play in your system? Because we can't have these guys like Carlies and Jalen Jones next season who Lou's not going to play them. So why are they here? Right? Like, they're not these great special teams players. So if Lou's not going to play them and you believe in Lou to be your defensive coordinator, but he wants younger, faster guys, get different younger, faster guys.
And this is also, I totally agree. And this is also part of the thing. If you're going to say, let's get younger and faster, that also can't be, hey, we're just going to get new guys that Lou knows next year when these things happen.
Right. It can't be 30-something-year-old guys.
This is why I said that he's probably not going to have the same power, especially with jobs on the line, to bring in your friends when we're trying to get younger and faster. And we saw how older and slower basically destroyed. So I'm saying, if like some of his guys become available mid-season, I'm not sure that that's an option the way it was last year.
Okay, that's a good point. We talked about that on Twitter, where I kind of disagree, but the way I disagreed with you was more so, I think he's going to have a say on the type of player they bring in.
Yes,
but not on like, this guy played for me, that's why I need him. I think he's going to have a heavy say in like Arnold Ibikiti or whatever from Atlanta, young, fast, explosive defensive end who can get pressure quickly if he can get pressure. I think Lou can just be like, yes, that guy fits my system.
No doubt. Yeah.
I think that's the type of sway he's going to have. I do agree with you, though, that he's not going to have the same sway where it's like, go get me Mike Hilton.
You got to go get Trey
Hendrickson.
Hendrickson.
Yeah.
Like I just don't see you like I don't see Trey Hendrickson might have been, and I'm actually like glad it didn't happen. And I did say that at the time. I didn't want Trey Hendrickson at the time, but it's probably when you think about how old and slow plagued this thing. I'm not calling Trey Hendrickson old or slow, but he probably at his age and his injury history wouldn't be worth the price point now. That's all I more meant is like. He's probably not just going to get guys because they played for him. I don't believe that that's the case because I think that they need to ultimately find the types of guys, but they have to get younger and slower or younger and faster. Younger and slower.
Jalen Jones, baby, come on down.
Juju Brent, welcome to the team.
Right. I hate on Jalen Jones so I think he's a great fit in a Tampa 2 or a cover 3 type system. Just
he played really well in 24. I wouldn't say really well. He played good football for his draft stock. Like he was everything you could ask for a 7th round pick.
Right. He just needs to be in a different, more like send him to Houston in a little bit more of a stagnant. He could be like a third. He could be a good player down there, but just not here with Indy's man coverage and diversity. One more thing I wanted to discuss, because this is something that you brought up a lot in the preseason. And while, again, it was very hit or miss when it does, but you were really concerned about the run fits coming into the year, especially with how they use their defensive backs in run fits and just how they aligned with motion and stuff. Did that bear fruit for you? Did that, like in the regular season, was that as concerning as you were concerned in the
It would when they couldn't tackle. I think tackling was yet again another problem with this defense, which it often is when you don't perform. So that was a really good point. I was very concerned. I think early in the year I was actually proven wrong. Like they had done a really good job, I think, shutting down some of the early run. Like I was petrified about what Devon Achane was going to do to this defense. That didn't necessarily come to fruition. I think Sean Payton is really good at scheming up things for that. That was relatively fine. Now they didn't play early in the year. Like when you look at like the rushing attacks that they played, they weren't outside of like the Rams were really good. The Chargers didn't have Hampton at the time. They were playing with
Denver's was fine this year, especially because Dobbins played in that game too. So you could say Broncos, that was a decent one. Yeah.
But they did play some bad rushing attacks. I think Bijan Robinson was probably the one where you could look at the entire year and be like, yeah, that wasn't great, but that's also Bijan Robinson.
The San Fran game too. The San Fran,
obviously the San Fran game late in the year. But for the most part, I thought they were much better than I was concerned about. And I think when it was bad, it was bad. And I think that's where I think another thing you pointed out before we hit record is like, it was weird because when DeForest Buckner was out of the lineup, suddenly they became better at stopping the run. Obviously, we're not saying that you wouldn't say that DeForest Buckner is a bad run defender at all, but that's just how it kind of played out. And I think schematically is part of that too.
Yeah, no, I think they leaned more into the run blitzes when he was out. They were more aggressive. And it was more of like the other 11 guys being like, oh shit, Buckner's not in there. Like we have to get on
There's
our
an element of that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was part of an element there. And then when he was in the game, I'm not saying they were more lax, but it's like maybe more complacent with it overall. And it led to like he's got, especially against San Fran when he was not DeForest Buckner in that game. He was a quarter of DeForest Buckner in that game because he was hurt. And that's what led to just them getting eviscerated in that entire game. But yeah, like overall, I think with Lou, like the negatives are, I do think that sometimes we're doing too much creativity with guys who like just weren't capable of it this season. And maybe at times like bend don't break would have been a better route with the guys that were on the field because they were, I mean, there were some games they were rolling out Edwards, Mekhi Blackman at corner, and their defensive line was just like, and I'm not even trying to talk horribly about the defensive line, but like, how are you going to get consistent pressure with Latu, Gallimore, Grover, and Quiddy as your 4? Like, you have to blitz. You have to bring pressure. And then if you blitz and bring pressure, it's Edwards and Blackman on an island. So
there's a part of this where it's like the defensive line has regressed with injuries and age. Like they fell off a cliff in that way. And I think that I think that's really important. Like it's really funny because like literally this time 2 years ago, they were like, oh, the strength is the O-line, the D-line. It's not the D-line anymore. And that's a big problem they're going to have to address because ultimately it's hard on a defensive coordinator because if you have to do one or the other. And I think that Lou, as much as like we've said, that's where I think this discussion is really interesting because you can play both sides of it where he's like, you have to praise him because he did like, when you go look at like his where they were in terms of EPA, it could have been way worse when you also think about the injuries that they had to suffer.
Yeah. So yeah, there were a lot of negatives. Like we just spent 20 minutes talking negative guys. So don't worry. We are fans of Lou Anarumo, but we had our fair amount of qualms and negatives with him.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I think overall, you and I would both skew towards positive season for Lou Anarumo. I think it can get better, but it can certainly be worse. Like, I saw some Colts fans saying, like, we hope Lou gets hired by by a team as a head coach, and I'm like, I don't know where this defense would go if they lost him. Like, it would be tough.
I actually put the blame of this season and where the shortcomings were of, if you want to blame anything about Lou Anarumo, in my opinion, it's the GMing that he was doing, where the roster was like, this is not, when they were trotting guys out on game days, like, this is not a team that is playing like they have, Cam Bynum is like a piece in the back end. Nick Cross is out there. He kind of like tapered off towards the end. The pass rush, as we pointed to, was non-existent. The linebackers could not cover and were just shredded by tight ends late in the year. So it's like, it's hard for me to say like, ooh, a new defensive coordinator is going to change this with this roster that's broken. And part of that is the guys that he chose, or advocated for. So I think that's part of it.
Right. And I think anyone who like wanted Lou gone because they didn't like this scheme, which we'll talk about in a second, I think if the Colts had to hire somebody else, they would hire someone similar to this scheme. They would hire like a Durante Jones or someone from Minnesota who runs a very similar scheme to this. So I don't think you guys would escape the scheme that they're running.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So to close out this show, though, we'll 15 to 20 more minutes. I don't want to go past an hour with this. Let's do a little bit of debunking of some popular misconceptions. And we kind of just talked about one there where it's like this team would have been better without Lou Anarumo. I vehemently disagree. Like, no chance.
Completely, I think
no chance. But I think the biggest one, and I'm actually going to let Lou introduce this little segment here because I actually have a clip from when Jake Arthur asked him, Jake Arthur, friend of this show and very good friend of the other show I do. He asked Lou Anarumo about bend don't break defense at one point this year, and I want to show you guys just the disdain in Lou's eyes when he's talking about this style of defense. I'm going to play the clip right now.
I don't ever want to be considered that way. I think, we want to challenge and be aggressive. And, there's times of the game where we're up some points and maybe we're a little softer there and don't want to give up a quick score, but that's certainly not our mentality. We want to be aggressive and dictate to people. We don't look at it as, hey, let's just give up a bunch of yards and don't let them score. That's not how we operate.
So
you can see when he said that, he's like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's a slur to Lou, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't
I think offended him.
Yeah, Jake is like offended Lou with that. But here's one thing I really want to point out. When you look at Gus Bradley, you look at Matt Eberflus, heck, you even look at Robert Saleh with what he was dealing with this year. Those coaches embrace bend don't break to a degree, right? Where it's like, hey, we know what we're dealing with. We know what our team is. We know in this league it's about limiting points more so than yards, and they fully embraced bend don't break. Lou has never embraced that.
I mean, he was second in six-man pressures.
Right. And when I saw I saw this from a lot of Colts fans, and this is probably what my first video is going to be on, was, similar system to Gus Bradley, a lot of bend don't break stuff. And I want to debunk that so bad right now because it is God. Like,
it's not
it's just not reality. It's just not reality at all.
So I said this before, when we talk about the bend don't break, a lot of middling defenses get tabbed as the bend don't break, because if you're not elite and you're not forcing 3 and outs, which the Colts did not force a lot of, and you aren't just awful where you are just giving up all sorts of points every single week, you get tabbed as this like bend but don't break. Ooh, we're gonna like give up a bunch of big plays, but then when the space gets tighter, here's my thought about the bend but don't break. 2 things. One, with the new kickoff rules, it's very easy to become a bend but don't break because you don't need that many yards to get to essentially field goal range. So the Colts do force teams to kick field goals in that space. The second part is because I'm not going to say that they were bend but don't break, but what I will say is the Colts did play better in the red zone and goal line because they are a slower defense, so they needed that natural roof over the top where you're playing in condensed spaces. And that's I pointed that out with the 49ers games. Like, you see them in between, they were getting absolutely ran, like they couldn't cover anyone in between the like 20s. As soon as they got there and you played with that natural roof, they made more plays because they weren't as fast to cover people. So those are my 2 thoughts on that. I would not characterize this as a bend but don't break defense. I would characterize this as a quality red zone defense and goal line defense for the most part, and they made more plays when they didn't have much grass to cover.
Yeah, the thing is, they weren't trying to give up third down conversions. They just stunk on third down this year, guys. That's all it was. Like, they were running a lot of man coverage on those third downs. Like, they weren't trying to give up those conversions. This wasn't Gus Bradley where everyone plays the sticks and then comes downhill and tries to tackle, and they were missing tackles. This was purely, we're going to play man coverage. We're going to blitz on third down. We want to force the quarterback into mistakes and incompletions. But because we're playing man, if they do get a completion, it's going to be a first down. And especially with the guys they were rolling out there at corner. So I don't think there was ever a moment this year where I thought bend don't break. And I think a lot of fans, they go to the 2-minute collapses, right, by this defense, where in the 2-minute drill, they give up a score that led to the other team winning the game. They think of the Seattle game, right, Ben, where like, that's our bend don't break. Like, why were they sitting back? But the Seattle game, I've pushed back in particular because on the 3 plays against Seattle, where Seattle went down and got into field goal range, they ran an aggressive match coverage on the first play that Edwards got beat by Shaheed. Just out talent on the next one. They brought an all-out blitz where Edwards got beat by Shaheed on a speed out. And then they brought a simmed pressure and they bailed out of it, which Darnold threw in the ground. And that was the end of the game. Like, what was bend don't break about that? They went after him.
I was just looking at this, and it's like the numbers don't really even back this up, because you're right. They were trying to, at every turn, you look at the third down fronts they were getting to. This was not like we're going to sit back. And I think that's what a true bend but don't break. I think you hit the nail on the head with that, because this team was trying to dictate. They just weren't good enough. So the results looked bend but don't break. Right. So they were never at once trying to be like, you just take these yards, but we're going to start playing well when we get you're about to score. We'll start playing well. Like, I don't agree with that at all.
No, not at all. And yeah, they were better in the red zone. I think that's just because the communication was better. But at the end of the day, talent matters in the NFL. I think of like, honestly, to a degree, I think, again, Lou could have been better could have run more bend don't break. Because I think one of the biggest examples I have is the Cardinals game. There was a
I know exactly what
there was a 3rd and 17.
Yeah.
And we have Jonathan Edwards covering Trey McBride. Poor Jonathan Edwards keeps getting all the shit on this show here. But like, Edwards 1-on-1 man coverage with Trey McBride running just a deep crosser on 3rd and 17. One safety over top of the 3-by-1 to the top of the screen. And Lou's bringing 5 and running man across the board with 1 safety over the top on 3rd and 17. And I'm like, Lou, I love your aggressiveness. Too aggressive. Just sit back at the sticks.
Exactly. And to my point, like we talked about this defense, they were 11th in red zone touchdown percentage. So they were really, when they played in those condensed spaces, yes, they did play well. So I think what we're saying really is the results led to bend but don't break, but this is far from a bend but don't break.
No, if anything, he was too aggressive this year.
Exactly.
If anything, he was too aggressive at times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, too aggressive with the personnel he had on the back end, which led to some of these like 3rd and 15 conversions because they're playing man coverage with only 1 safety over the top and they're bringing 5. And the 5 guys they're bringing can't get home. Their corners can't cover. And that's what's leading to a conversion. They were trying to give that up.
Exactly. And a lot of this is like to Lou's philosophy is like, we're going to affect quarterbacks. And I think that he affected quarterbacks and didn't affect offenses. And I think that's when you got to a point where like you did get into that situation of like, you might have like brought a blitz that's really going to put pressure on Jacoby Brissett, but you also just put pressure on your corner who now has to run with Trey McBride, who isn't big enough to do that and isn't probably good enough to do that either. So I think that was a part of it.
Yeah, I think honestly they were just too aggressive sometimes on defense, exactly. And I love aggressive coaching.
It was a complete. They said that they were going to do a 180 after Gus Bradley, and they really did.
Yeah, and that brings me to our second and probably our last debunking of this one. And again, it kind of goes with that where it's like some people saying like, oh, this system was the same as Gus Bradley's, the same system of Gus Bradley's. Ben, I need to put my opinion first, and then you can go. So drastically different from Gus Bradley's system. Outside, I guess the one similarity was they kind of both originate from a single high system. They were both very single high based, both of them. Not even remotely close, not even the same stratosphere as Gus Bradley's defense.
It couldn't be any different from the front to the pressures, to the coverage on the back end, to the diversity of coverage on the back end, to the type of personnel that you need. And I think that's why we saw it in certain spots, to how they fit the run, to how they communicate, even to how they communicate on defenses. I mean, Carly literally said it I forgot where I saw this, but they had more rules to adjust to different formations than they had. It's not like we're just going to play this defense, and if you do this, we'll do that. It's like, oh, you're going to come out in 3-by-1. All right, we have a check for that. Oh, you're going to play in empty. We have a check for that. And that's how these play calls get a lot longer. This is not the same defense. It's very easy, I think, to when you see similar results to think that the process was the exact same, and it was not. It was completely different. They did unfortunately get to the better results. I think you and I probably both agree that with better health and some personnel changes on the defensive side of the ball, they can get to where they want to go defensively, but the process couldn't be any more different from what Gus Bradley was doing.
Yeah, I think honestly a part of the issue was just too many of Gus Bradley's guys, or guys who are used to Gus Bradley's system, being out there this year and just not adapting to how different it was. We look at, again, like guys like Zaire Franklin, guys like Kenny Moore, guys like Nick Cross, who I think are good football players to varying degrees, obviously. But maybe they don't fit what this system was, or maybe they just need more time in this system. Maybe that's what it is. Because there were, like, when it came to a lot of like the miscommunications and the issues when it came to certain rules and stuff like that, and certain fits, those were the guys who had bigger issues than like even a Jonathan Edwards, who this is the only system he knows in the NFL. So he at least knew this system, but some of those guys got into some of the old Gus habits. But I think that just displays again just how different the two systems were, where like guys who played well under Gus Bradley or thrived under Gus Bradley really struggled at times this year. And like Nick Cross, for instance, I think is a big example where I thought he was going to soar with this defense. And I think the first half of the year, especially when
I think you could say he was one of the more valuable people in the first half, but it was almost shocking what happened in the second. For the entire roster, but for him particularly.
Yeah, he really struggled down the stretch, especially when he got more responsibilities in coverage. Because the first half of the year, a lot of the successes was him being limited to being this jackknife in the box. Like, he was great run defender in the box. He was blitzing a lot. He was doing like very limited coverage responsibilities, like these man coverage against tight ends and man coverage against slot guys in very confined spaces. But then once his role expanded, his play just plummeted. Because they asked more of him down the stretch when they just didn't have the personnel, and it just struggled from there.
Exactly. And he's a guy that when you get him into the box, he can be a very, very efficient player. I think what we did see is when he came out of the box, and, they're using them on these rotations where the next thing you know, you're bailing to a half field player, you're doing this, or you have to carry 3 vertical versus that's not necessarily the world that he would always live in. So.
Yeah. Or like, hey, on this, check to covering the slot guy in man coverage. And he just would avoid, like, I keep going back to that Houston game, that Houston final drive, where he's just covering air on that, on that big third down conversion. Everyone else is in man, and he's just covering air, and that guy crosses his face and gets that big completion. It's like, Nick, man, we gotta cover somebody here. So it's stuff like that. I think a lot of the struggles came from the carryovers from the last scheme to this scheme, along with the older guys coming in just not having the legs for it anymore. Whereas, like, I think there is some good stuff in place for younger players who are just learning the system. And I think that's where we need that melding between Lou and Ballard, where it's like, let's bring in guys who can do this system here.
Yep.
But again, I think that just shows how different the two systems were. Where like the carryovers from Gus's system to this one, really, most of them really struggled. And the guys who thrived were either players who didn't really play under Gus, like Adetomiwa in this system, Neville Gallimore, who didn't play under Gus, Cameron Bynum, who was a free agent addition. Some of the, I think Wally was looking great in camp and he would have had a good season. Those are the guys who played better this year. Whereas a lot of the carryovers, we saw some struggles. I guess Grover Stewart was the one exception to that. I thought he had a better year.
He's as solid of a player as he's ever been.
Yeah. But outside of that, I think, just to show the difference in the schemes, a lot of the carryover guys struggled this year.
Yeah, no doubt. And maybe Latu was the one, but I think that was just such a big focus of them. Like, we got to get him doing something.
Well, I think he fit the system too.
And
he kind of
people say that he's just not good. I don't agree. I'm with you. I don't agree with this idea that he's not good. Do I think he's a generational pass rusher? No. Is he one of the elite pass rushers? No. But has he been a fine player that you can put out there on Sundays? Yeah, definitely.
He's one good offseason away from being an impact player, but we'll talk about that in a future show. But overall, guys, I think this is a good summary of a lot of my thoughts on Lou Anarumo. This is a way to kick off the series. Again, this is a series, so a lot of these like concepts that Ben and I talked about, from the defense being kind of old and slow, from some issues with like dropping defensive ends into coverage, but also some positives like how they were diverse, how they were not bend, don't break, and they were aggressive. I think a lot of those are going to be covered in more fine details in future videos, but this is kind of the overarching thoughts on Lou Anarumo. You guys let us know below in the comment section what you think. Were you pro Lou? Were you anti Lou? Did this conversation enlighten you or make you hate us? Whatever this conversation did.
Hate us. We weren't critical enough. We just weren't critical enough. The defense wasn't good enough. So
yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it needed to get better, but I think there are some positive aspects of it. But let us know in the comment section below what you think this offseason's in store for the Colts and what you think of the series going forward. But Ben, thank you for joining me. As always, we'll do more episodes and shows like this for sure, covering even more aspects, especially if they get a new offensive coordinator, Ben. I'm excited. If they get a new offensive coordinator, we'll be talking more about some candidates for that. But tune in again for future episodes on the Lou and Review series.